Everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today here with the Brain Injury Society of Toronto. My name is Ayushi. I wanted to put my name up before I actually introduce myself because I know it's a hard name to get to to try to visualize. So I wanted to make sure my name is up there so you can see. I'm an occupational therapist and I work at Complex Injury Rehab. We have a clinic in Pickering. We also do our home visits around the GTA. And so, from my end, I work as an occupational therapist. And as an occupational therapist, I mainly see people post brain injury or post concussion. A lot of the clients that I do see are presenting with persistent symptoms of concussion, and one of the most persistent symptoms that I see is fatigue. And that's kind of one of those symptoms that lasts pretty long term. It's one of those that never quite goes away, at least from what I see with my clients. And so the purpose of today is to really um, give you some strategies on how you can manage that fatigue and little things you can do throughout the day and also just long term to help you manage that fatigue and help you to do the things that you want to be doing throughout the day. And that's, kind of one of the core philosophies with occupational therapy is to try to get back is to try to help clients get back to doing the activities that are important to them, that are meaningful to them, while trying to break down any sort of barriers that are preventing them from participating in those activities. So in today's case, it's fatigue. So that's kind of the big main barrier that we'll be talking about today. And I just want to say that again, or repeat that this is being recorded, and so you don't feel like you have to take notes or anything. If screen time is a bit of an issue for you or is a challenge for you, you can also, you don't have to be looking the whole time, and just you can just listen to me speak and then look at the slides afterwards, if that's easier for you. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A box or use the chat box. I'll see how well I can multitask and look at the questions as they come up. If I don't answer right away, we will have time at the very end to answer some questions. So with that said, actually, let me make sure that there aren't any questions right now. I don't see anything, so okay. Okay, so let's just get started here. So today, we're going to go over defining fatigue. It can mean different things for different people, so we'll kind of go over that. And then we'll go over different types of fatigue and factors that contribute to your fatigue. Then I want to show you some activity patterns in terms of your tolerances and how you can change those activity patterns to help manage your fatigue a little bit better. And then we'll go over the 4 P's of energy conservation, or, 4 P's of just managing fatigue generally. And then I'll introduce to you a system that you can use to help track your activities and to help pace yourself. It's good for people, I guess, who are all about numbers or just need more objective ways of planning out their days. So I'll introduce that to you. It's called the Parkwood Pacing Points system. And then at the very end, I want to go over some sleep hygiene practices, because sleep is a huge factor in your fatigue levels throughout the day. So I want to make sure we cover that as a foundational thing to help you manage your fatigue as well. So to start off, what is fatigue? Well, fatigue is that sort of weariness or tiredness that you feel after a period of mental or physical exertion. And it often, results in having this reduced capacity to work and respond to stimuli efficiently. So, when you feel that fatigue coming in, it makes it harder for you to engage, sometimes in something as simple as having a conversation with someone. And so you have that reduced capacity to even engage with someone socially. Um, like I mentioned at the very beginning, fatigue is one of the more persistent symptoms of concussion, and the studies that have come out have shown that it can still be present up to 5 years post injury. And that if you're still experiencing fatigue 3 months post injury, you're likely to experience it beyond the 6 months. So that's why it's something that's really important to address as soon as you can to avoid that long-term impact or having to deal with it long term. So if you're able to apply, the strategies that we'll be talking about today, as early as you can, we can try to prevent this from happening, prevent the fatigue from lasting so long. And the thing with fatigue is also that it can create this sort of ongoing cycle of other symptoms or other challenges that you might be having. So, for example, this is a very simplified way of how fatigue can kind of cycle through these different sort of symptoms. So, you can start off with fatigue, and like I said before, it can result in this reduced capacity to work or think. And so that can result in poor coping and problem solving skills. And as you exhibit those poor problem solving skills or poor ways of coping through things, it can increase your level of stress. And then as you experience a higher level of stress, it can lead to symptoms of depression. And as you may know, one of the symptoms of depression is fatigue, or this sort of nonstop ongoing fatigue, which then, just continues through that cycle. So it's good to try to target all these, areas, because as long as we can maybe try to target one or two areas, it might help with the other areas. For the purposes of today, we'll, focus on targeting the fatigue part of it so that we can, try to decrease this ongoing cycle and maybe indirectly help you with addressing these other challenging areas. So there are different types of fatigue. I think, with the general population, they're probably more familiar with that physical fatigue. So, that physical tiredness after any sort of physical exertion. So, typically, or we'll think of right after a gym workout, you'll feel that physical fatigue. Or after you've done big cleanup of the house or raking leaves. I guess these days, shoveling the snow. And then sometimes it can come on, the physical fatigue can come on even from as simple as doing the laundry. And I think, a lot of you probably have experienced that decrease in tolerance for these sort of physical activities. Maybe before your concussion, you were able to clean the whole house and no problem, you'd be able to carry on with the rest of your day. But now your tolerance has significantly decreased to the point that you need to implement these rest breaks throughout, or you're just done for the day, or you're taking days to recover after doing a cleanup of the house. So that's physical fatigue. There's also cognitive fatigue, and this is following more so cognitively demanding tasks. And sometimes that can be listening to a conversation. It could be when you're reading or after you're reading or watching a movie. Um, or maybe sometimes even responding to emails or doing any sort of work or studying that you have to do. Maybe I'm sure, and I'm sorry about this, but after this presentation, you probably might feel quite a bit of cognitive fatigue because there's a lot of information that you're taking in, and that in itself can cause this sort of tiredness from that capacity to just think properly. And so that's another type of fatigue that I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. And again, you might have noticed that your tolerance for these types of activities has reduced. Now, there are a lot of different factors that you may want to consider when thinking about your fatigue level. So obviously there's participation in these activities that lead to fatigue, but sometimes there are other factors in play that are playing a role. So you might be on some medications where there are side effects of sleepiness or tiredness. Your sleep is a huge factor. Depending on what kind of a sleep you got the previous night, that will affect you the next day. And the reason I put in red is because that's something we'll be talking about today, how we can help improve the quality of your sleep. And another factor could be your mood. Sometimes, if you're having a really bad day, or you're feeling really anxious that day, that can tire you out as well, and that can be a contributing factor to fatigue. The time of day is a contributing factor. Sometimes, people have better energy in the morning versus later in the afternoon. So that's just a cue for you to maybe plan out some more demanding tasks earlier in the day when you have that energy to do it. And then the other factor is also looking at the environment of where you're completing your activities. So reading can be a cognitively demanding task and cause cognitive fatigue. But there's a difference between reading in a very quiet environment with no distractions versus reading in a very busy environment. For example, maybe if you're at a coffee shop and you're reading, that's very different from reading in a quiet room in your home. So your tolerance for reading in a quiet room might be 30 minutes versus in a coffee shop might be 15 minutes. So that's something important to consider when you're planning out your activities. What kind of environment are you in when you're engaging in that activity? And how can you set up your environment in a way to increase your tolerance? The important thing to remember at the end of the day, though, is that everyone has different tolerances and triggers. There's no one, everybody with a concussion has those different tolerances. And so it's important to be very aware of what your personal tolerances are. So going back to the example of reading, maybe someone with a concussion can read for 30 minutes in a quiet bedroom versus someone else who can only spend 20 minutes. And that's fine. It's just a matter of figuring that out for yourself. Now, I wanted to put this slide up because these are things I've heard from clients, almost verbatim. These are quotes I've heard from clients, because I know a lot of the time, not just people with concussion, everybody has a tendency to push themselves beyond their limits. And so I'll hear things like, especially from people with concussion, I used to be able to do all this. They used to be able to do a full day of work and then do a workout and cook dinner and they'd be completely fine. And so one of the reasons they try to push themselves is because they're so fixated on the idea of what was. And so this is something I hear a lot, that they used to be able to do all this and they really want to try to go back to being able to do all that again. And then Another thing I hear a lot is I just need to push myself more because maybe that will just help me recover and get my body used to it again. Another thing I hear is, and this is more of an external thing, where I don't want to let other people down. And, again, maybe before a lot of people depended on you and asked you to do things for them. And post concussion, that maybe hasn't changed and people are still depending on you and you don't want to let them down. So instead of, taking a break when you might need it or saying no, you continue or you engage in that activity so that you're not letting those people down. And then another external thought is, people will think I'm lazy. I'm already not doing much. So if I don't do this, what will people think? So the reason I put this is I just, want to make sure everybody here knows that if you're having these thoughts, you're not alone. I've heard this before, and they're very normal thoughts to have, especially when, there used to be a way you used to do things and you just want to go back to normal, and that's completely fine. And I hopefully after this presentation, I can try to give you some, or I've given you enough strategies to help you still participate in those activities, maybe in just a different way, but that you're still able to do the things that you want to do or need to do, but just in a slightly different way. So I want to now move on here then to presenting certain activity patterns. And so all the graphs that I'll be showing you will pretty much look the same, just different versions. So at the bottom here, we have the green zone, which is considered the safe zone. And this is where you're experiencing 0 to minimal symptoms. And then we have the symptom onset threshold. And if you go beyond this threshold, you then get into the red zone of symptoms where, it's that very bad headache or the fatigue, which is another symptom, or difficulty processing, maybe some dizziness. So the idea is in the acute stages of your injury, so post-concussion, maybe 1 to 4 weeks post-injury, the idea is, and the recommendation is, that you want to try to stay in the green zone as much as possible. So you can, engage in a certain level of activity. And then once you feel some symptoms going on, or you know it's about to come, you take a break and you take a bit of a break to help you recover before going on to another activity or the same activity. So here, as you can see, it's time going by, and then this is the intensity of the activity. So this is in the acute stages, this is what the recommendation is in terms of your activity patterns. Then this is what I often see when clients first come to see me. And this is after your symptoms may have persisted for longer than you'd like. And what I see is, a client starts off with feeling pretty good and they're ready to start their day, they're ready to start in their activity. And so they engage in that activity and they push themselves and they feel themselves pushing themselves, getting into that mild to moderate level of symptoms, going beyond the symptom threshold. And then they don't stop, they continue because of maybe those thoughts that we were talking about earlier. I can't let this person down. I need to keep going, or this is how I used to be able to do things. So I'm going to keep going. And so they push themselves, and then they get into the significant symptom zone, or the red zone, or the danger zone. They get there, and it's only when they get there is when they realize, oh shoot, this is too much. This headache's too much. I'm so tired. So they crash and burn. They go back to, they have to take that long rest break. So they take that rest break in their green zone, and then they start feeling better. So then they go back. to the activity or another activity, and they push themselves and they push themselves and they push themselves. And then they get into the red zone again. And then, oh no, this is too much. I need to crash. And so they take that long rest break again. So as you can see, the rest break is actually longer than the time they spent in the actual activity. And this is just an ongoing cycle that continues, which doesn't promote recovery at all, because you just end up spending more time in your rest than you do in the actual engagement in the activity. So, I hear this a lot from clients. They spent, a day cleaning their house, and then they took 2 days to recover from that, because they just pushed themselves too much for that day. Now, what we're aiming for is this, the persistent symptom target activity pattern. So we want to still be able to engage in the activity, and it's okay to go into the yellow zone where you're feeling that mild to moderate level of symptoms. And so there is still that level of pushing yourself, but not to the point that you're getting into the red zone. So that this creates more of a balance between activity participation, but then also giving you that time to rest. And then once you've given yourself enough of that time to rest, you can go back to your activity. And this is the activity pattern that we're aiming for, and that's the most conducive to promoting recovery. And so the goal is to gradually increase activity tolerance without significantly increasing symptoms or crossing the symptom threshold into the red danger zone. Therefore, planning and pacing of activities is very important. And that's something, that I'll get into shortly. You need to find the right level of activity whereby your symptoms are either eliminated or manageable. And then as your symptoms are better controlled, you can gradually increase your activity level to then eventually get to something that looks like this. So this is the long-term goal here that we're aiming for, which is to say that you start off your day, you're feeling good, you have all this energy, so you participate in the activity that you chose to participate for that day, and you're able to increase that time you spend within that activity. You might still feel the mild to moderate symptoms, and that's okay as long as it's manageable and you're still able to show some capacity for that activity. But the idea is, and hopefully you'll notice up here, we have the rest break a lot shorter compared to the actual activity. So you're able to engage longer in your activity, still implement a break, but at least the break isn't as long as, well, let's go back here to here, what your current activity pattern might be looking at. So here it's a lot longer, and that's something we want to try to avoid, because that prevents you from participating throughout your day, and you're spending most of your day resting versus engaging in the activity. So the goal is to try to minimize those rest breaks so that you have more time to participate in your activities. So that's the long-term goal here. And as I said, it'll take the implementation of those planning and pacing strategies to help achieve this goal. So let's go through some of those strategies. So I've mentioned, planning and pacing a lot. There's actually 4 P's to it to help with energy conservation and for fatigue management. So there's prioritize, there's plan, there's position, and there's pace. So to start off, we can start with prioritizing. So this is really a matter of figuring out what are the most important things that need to be done for that day, and making sure that while they're getting done, you can also put off other things to a later date. So you have to decide what needs to be done that day and then put off the things that maybe don't need to be done that day. So, for example, if you know you have a doctor's appointment that's scheduled for that day, but someone, in your household had also asked you to vacuum that day or, do some kind of household chore that day, it's important to obviously prioritize the doctor's appointment and figure out when you can put off the vacuuming or the chore to a later date. So that's a very basic concept with prioritizing. Once you're able to prioritize, it's important to then figure out how to plan things accordingly. So planning, you can look at it in a big picture level in terms of planning out your activities throughout the week. So again, we can go back to that doctor's appointment. And if you know that there's a certain day that you have that appointment, you want to plan things out so that you're not including any activities that day or very low sort of stimulating activities or activities that aren't too demanding. And it's important to also look at what is actually involved in a doctor's appointment. It's not just the appointment itself. You have to think about, getting to the appointment. Are you driving? Is someone driving you? Do you have to take the bus to get there? How long is the commute? That trip in itself can be very tiring. And then there's the appointment itself, waiting in the waiting room. That can be demanding, just in terms of maybe you're feeling anxious. And like we said, mood can have an effect on your fatigue. Or it's a very distracting environment, so that might be affecting you as well. And then, of course, there's the appointment itself, which can be very cognitively demanding. So, asking questions, listening to what the doctor has to say, taking in a lot of information. That is a lot of, information that's coming in that you need to process that can really tire you out from a cognitive perspective and result in that sort of cognitive fatigue that we had talked about. So, and then of course there's the commute right after. So all of that actually adds up, and you want to be able to plan for all of those things that are involved in one activity, in one appointment. I just mentioned so many different things that are involved that I think a lot of people end up losing sight of. They don't realize how it actually all adds up. And so maybe on the surface level, you'll think the appointment is not that big of a deal and plan out maybe a dinner afterwards with a friend or, something else. But then you get to that dinner or you get to that activity after the appointment only to realize that all this fatigue like really caught up to you. So it's important to really break down those activities. And the best way to do that is to, using a day planner, and almost going hour by hour so that you can see for yourself what it is that you're doing so that you can then plan out the rest of your day. So that's on a big picture level. On a smaller scale level, you can plan out the activity itself, right, that you're going to be doing. So, for example, with cooking, to avoid, moving around too much and moving around in different parts of your kitchen or that extra processing that it takes to jump from, one thing to another. It's good to try to, gather all your supplies and your ingredients right before you get started so that you have everything there and you don't have to get distracted or you don't have to process, okay, where do I need to go? What do I need to get? You just have it all there in front of you to take off that sort of cognitive load. And then another way to think of planning is to plan to alternate between heavy and light tasks throughout the day. So again, this goes back to kind of planning your activities throughout the week. If there are certain heavier household chores that you need to do, kind of breaking that up with maybe lighter tasks that you can be doing throughout the day as well that aren't so demanding. And then the other way to think of planning is also planning to get a good rest each night, especially when you know the next day you're going to have a busy day. Maybe you have that doctor's appointment, and so you want to plan to get a good rest that the night before, so that you have conserved enough energy to get you through that day. And again, we'll be talking about sleep shortly. The other way to think of planning is to plan to get help from friends or family to help complete tasks that you won't get to. So as you're using, your day planner and you've planned out activities throughout the week, maybe thinking about, okay, are there certain things I can assign to a friend or family to help out with, so that that's one less thing I need to worry about or do myself. And maybe that opens up a time slot for you to do something else for yourself, or to have a bit of a rest break because you planned to get help from a friend or family to do that for you. So there are different ways to think about planning. So all of these different ways are important for fatigue management as well. Now, the other P is position. And so when you're either sitting or standing, it's good to try to maintain a nice upright posture, just because that in itself helps get more oxygen into your lungs, which then just overall helps to give energy, or to conserve energy, at least to help you carry out with whatever task you're doing in that sitting or standing position. And then the other thing you can also maybe try and make more conscious decisions around is sitting down whenever you can, because this actually helps reduce energy by 25%. So, laundry, if you're folding your laundry usually in a standing position, maybe try sitting down to do your laundry, or you can use a high stool or a bar stool for when you're doing the dishes. Those moments that if you can implement sitting can make a huge difference along the way or throughout your day. And then the last thing here is pacing. That's the last P here. So it's important that to try to maintain a slow and steady pace, and you want to try to avoid rushing through your activities as well. And part of pacing is implementing frequent rest breaks. So as you're maintaining that slow and steady pace, you also want to be breaking up your activity into sort of manageable steps, but also in between those steps, implementing those rest breaks. And you want to be aware of your limits. So you want to listen to your body, so that you can kind of catch yourself when you're noticing getting into that mild to moderate level of symptoms, so that you know when it's time to implement a rest break. So the best way to do this really is to use a timer. And you can use a timer on your phone. If you're in the kitchen, maybe set it on your microwave or on your oven, which often come with a timer that you can set for yourself. And then before you engage in any sort of activity, set a timer for how long you're going to engage in that activity. So especially if you know what your tolerance is. And so setting your timer, for example, for 20 minutes when you start reading something, and then setting a timer again for 10 minutes for a break, which can be a walk, you can have a snack, or you can take an actual proper rest break to then help you get you back into sort of a baseline level of symptoms, or minimal symptoms. You want to get back into that green zone. And the reason it's important to use a timer is because it just gives you that very auditory cue that it's time to stop. And a lot of the time, and everybody is guilty of this, they lose track of time and they just keep going and they keep reading, or they keep working on that email, or they keep doing some kind of studying or work, and they don't realize how much time has gone by before it's too late, and they feel those symptoms coming on, and then they take hours to recover. So using a timer just helps you stay on track with your symptoms, or with helping to manage your symptoms. And, after a brain injury or after concussion, that's an area that's quite affected. Your temporal awareness, your awareness of time going by or time passing by. A lot of my clients, sometimes I'll just randomly ask, how much time do you think has passed by since our session started? And often they'll say, oh, maybe 10, 20 minutes, when actually 30 minutes have gone by. So it's important to just have that external cue to help manage your time, but also manage your activity tolerances. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about what it means to take a proper rest break. So I think a lot of the time, people sometimes think, okay, I'm going to take a bit of a break, and they go on their phone, or, they check their social media, and that's their break. Or they, call a friend, or um, they sometimes reading is a rest break for them. Now, when I talk about taking a proper rest break, especially when you're really symptomatic and you really want to go back to that green safe zone where you're non-symptomatic or minimally symptomatic. So I don't know if anyone's ever tried this, but if you ever if there's ever a need to charge your phone and you want to charge it really quickly, if you put your phone on airplane mode or on flight mode, it actually charges much faster than if you were to keep your phone on data, on Wi-Fi, or even just off flight mode or airplane mode. When you put it on airplane mode, it tends to charge a lot faster. And you can test this out for yourself. And the reason for that is because when it's on flight mode, or airplane mode, it doesn't have any input coming in. There's no data coming in. There's no texts even that can come in. No notifications whatsoever. So because it's not getting so much input, it's able to dedicate that energy towards recharging. So when you're taking a rest break, especially when you're quite symptomatic and you just want to have a quick recharge, you want to try to put your brain on airplane mode. And what that means is you don't want any input coming in. You want to try to block off all stimuli to help recharge faster. So that involves, going to a quiet room and turning off the lights, and maybe wearing an eye mask as well to really block out any light coming in, because all of that is just input. That's just stimuli that's coming in to your eyes or to your ears. If you're in a noisy environment, it's not completely quiet. And that's just extra filtering that your brain has to do, and that your brain puts an energy into, which could be put more so into just recharging and giving your brain that break that it needs. So the next time you're taking a break and you want to just recharge, think of your brain as your cell phone, and you're putting it, or your cell phone battery, and you're putting it on airplane mode to help you recharge a bit faster. Now, I've said all this, but it's, all dependent on who you are, in terms of your tolerances and your triggers, as I've kind of been saying all along. So at the end of the day, it's really just most important to listen to your body. And that takes a lot of, awareness and checking in with yourself, which is why setting a timer is a good idea, as just a cue for you to step away and really feel what you're feeling in that moment, so that you can be aware of what your symptoms are, and you can then take the break that you need. And the idea is that you want to stop and rest before you get too tired, before you get into that red danger zone. So that's really the key message here, is that you want to just listen to your body. Now, a way to help with that is to use a system where you can help figure out what sort of your activity tolerances are, and which can then help plan out your days. So the Parkwood Points pacing system, this is something that came out of an outpatient acquired brain injury program at St. Joseph's Healthcare in London, Ontario. And they use this point system to help with pacing your activities. And each activity is assigned a different amount of points depending on the intensity, the duration, and how triggering that activity is for symptom onset. So it's actually similar to the Weight Watchers program, but instead of collecting food points, what you're collecting are activity points. And the idea is to try to stay within a certain limit of your personal threshold of points. And this is where, your own self-awareness comes in, because you would be the one kind of assigning those points. But again, as a reminder, everyone has different tolerances. So the way it works is this is just a snapshot of sort of different activities you might be doing throughout the day and how many points you might assign to that activity. So something simple like doing your ADLs at the very beginning, doing a simple meal prep for breakfast, lunch, that might take, half a point or maybe just 1 point, versus doing meal prep for sort of a more complex dinner, you might assign 2 or 3 points. Versus other things like attending a doctor's appointment, which we talked about earlier, that can be very draining for some people, and they might assign 3 or 4 points. If you're working, again, that's cognitively demanding, can be very physically demanding as well, depending on the nature of your job. So per half a day, you might assign 3 to 5 points. So it's all relative here. And again, it depends on you and your tolerances. But the idea is that you want to try to assign yourself a limit of points for that day. So maybe your tolerance for a typical day is 15 points of activity levels. So when you're planning out your day and you're planning out your activities for that week, you want to implement activities in such a way that you're not surpassing that limit. And then that can just help with staying within your limits. And then also, hopefully, gradually, we can increase your tolerances as well. And, maybe 15 points is too low, or you realize you went 1 week going 15 points per day and you've been doing pretty well. So the following week or after 2 weeks, you try 20 points. And gradually we would increase that sort of the limits that you're putting on yourself. But again, it really depends on, like I was saying here, on the intensity of the activity and also the duration of that activity. So that's all something to kind of keep in mind as you're using this point system to plan out your day. Now I just want to shift over to sleep hygiene. So sleep, as I said, is a huge factor in your fatigue levels throughout the day, and not, getting enough good quality sleep, like I said, can be a contributing factor to your fatigue throughout the next day. And sleep hygiene is a set of practices to help promote a healthy, good night's sleep. And so today, I'm going to be going over 6 strategies for really strengthening those sleep habits. And there are 6 strategies that are outlined from the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation. And these are all sort of clinical guidelines that they've set out and for concussion management. And part of their guidelines include these strategies for ensuring proper sleep hygiene. So the first strategy, or the first sort of sleeping habit you want to try to implement, is to go to bed only when you're sleepy. So you don't want to delay your sleep, or else this would strengthen that association between your bed and not sleeping. So if you're going to bed and you're not even sleepy, you're probably going to stay awake in bed for a while. And then, time will go by, and then you'll just kind of strengthen that association between not sleeping and your bed. And the idea is that we want to create a strong association between your bed and sleep and make it a very positive place for your sleep. And there's a difference between feeling sleepy and feeling tired. With sleepiness, you want to be attentive to those signs. So that would include yawning and heavy eyelids and itchy and watery eyes. And those would be sort of your physical cues to know that, okay, I'm feeling sleepy. It's time for me to go to bed. The second strategy is to set aside at least 1 hour before bedtime for rest and relaxation. So you want to try to avoid sources of cognitive and emotional activation that can delay sleep. So this includes doing some kind of work, responding to emails, physical exercise. You want to reserve time for all this other stuff earlier in the evening. If you're doing it too close to bedtime, then you're activating so many different systems, too many different systems for you to actually get into this state of sleepiness that we're aiming for. So instead of these demanding activities or cognitively and emotionally demanding activities, you want to try activities that promote transition from wakefulness to sleepiness to sleep. So things like listening to music or reading, or maybe doing a mindfulness practice to really help induce that state of sleepiness. And you also, in that sort of hour before bedtime, you want to establish a bedtime routine. So taking a bath, brushing your teeth, washing your face, changing into your sleepwear. Those are all things you want to be doing as part of your routine in that 1 hour before bedtime. Now, this is a really important rule to follow here. So the third strategy, if unable to fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, you want to get out of bed. So again, we want to break that association between bed and insomnia. We don't want to link your bed to these thoughts of not being able to sleep or just not falling asleep. So if you're unable to fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're unable to fall back asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, you want to go to a different room. Because again, you don't want to create that association between your room or your bedroom and not being able to sleep. So some things you can try in that other room is you can try reading something, writing, listening to music. You can do a word search. You can try to go back to almost recreating a bedtime routine to kind of trick your body as you were doing, when it was actually ready to, you were actually ready to go to bed, and put your body and your mind back into that routine to help you get back into that state of sleepiness. What you want to avoid is going on your phone, going on a tablet, watching TV. You want to avoid doing any sort of physical exercises or household chores, because you just want to do something that's not too stimulating to help you get back into that state of sleepiness. The fourth strategy is that you want to try to get up at the same time each morning. So this includes weekends. So even on weekends, you want to try to get up at the same time. And you want to get up at the same time regardless of how much you slept the previous night. So how much sleep you got. This is all part of just following a proper routine, because as much as your sleep is about, the actual nighttime part of it, it's also about your daytime. And so you want to still try to carry out the day as you would, which involves getting up at the same time that you set out to do. So to help you with this, you want to set an alarm that's loud enough to get you up. You want to try to place it as far away enough from you so that you have to get up to actually turn it off. And hopefully, that will help with actually getting up and hopefully, getting your day started, even if you didn't get enough sleep the night before. The fifth strategy that they recommend is to reserve your bed only for sleep and sexual activities. So you want to actually avoid watching TV or using your phone, eating, working, or doing any sort of planning or worrying for the next day in bed. Again, it's all about strengthening that association between your bed and sleepiness. You also want to try to avoid falling asleep to the sound of TV, the radio, music, because if you're falling asleep to it, then your brain is actually continuing to pay attention to that stimuli that's coming in, causing a lighter sleep and then a low quality sleep, which will then result in you waking up not so refreshed for the day. So you want to try to avoid that, if not limit that. You can, I think, on some apps or phones, even though you shouldn't have your phone in bed. But if you do want to listen to music, there are ways you can set it so that it turns off after 15-20 minutes or so that you're not actually falling asleep to it, or it's not staying on as you fall asleep. And then the last thing is that you want to limit your naps during the day. So that's kind of the general rule, that you want to try to avoid naps. Obviously, sometimes you want a quick recharge and you need a nap, because especially if you have something going on later in the day and you didn't get a good night's sleep, so you want to take a nap to help recharge. But so if you're going to take a nap, try to take them earlier in the afternoon and try to limit them to 15 to 30 minutes, not more than 30 minutes. That's kind of the general rule with how long these naps should be. And then you also want to nap wherever you would sleep at night. So avoid napping on the couch or in a different room. You want to try to take those naps in your bed and wherever you sleep at night. Because again, it's all about creating that association between your bed and sleeping. So the takeaways for today, fatigue is a very common, persistent symptom of concussion. So I don't know how long or how far along people are in their concussion journey right now, but I do just want to help you know that it's very common. If you're still experiencing fatigue, it's a very common persistent symptom. And there are a number of factors that can contribute to your fatigue throughout the day. So not just the activities that you're doing throughout the day, but there are other factors to consider as well. So like we talked about, medication, the environment that you're in when you're engaging in that activity, your mood, the time the time of day when you're participating in that activity. Those are all factors that contribute to your fatigue. One of the ways to help manage your fatigue is pacing and planning your activities and implementing appropriate rest breaks throughout the day. So we talked about, different strategies you can use to help with that, including using the points system and also implementing those sort of proper rest breaks, those flight mode breaks, those airplane mode breaks to help you recharge more efficiently. And then it's also important to be aware of your tolerances and triggers for fatigue to help manage your day. And then as we kind of ended off with, following good sleep hygiene practices will also help in managing your fatigue. So I'm hoping, maybe tonight you can try to implement, at least 2 or 3 of those strategies. Ideally, it would be best if you actually implemented all 6 of those strategies. If you didn't take any notes, that's okay. As I said, all of this will be available to you on the BIST website, and I think also on their YouTube channel. I'm just gonna see if there were any questions. Okay. I see one question asking, how do you prove your fatigue to your employer? Is there any objective evidence we can provide? That's a good question, and a lot of it has come from, because I've gotten the same question from some of my clients, and a lot of the time it's really just come down to me advocating for them and, you know, putting a letter together that I can send to the employer so that they can have that sort of objective understanding from a health professional on how their participation in their work activities is having an impact on their fatigue levels. Because a lot of the time, you know, employers, they won't see it. That's the other thing with concussion, right? You can't see it. And I think a lot of the time people are just pushing themselves at work, which employers just see as them having the capacity to do so when really they're struggling inside. Or, you know, they get home and they just crash for the rest of the evening. So I think in terms of proving to the employer, what I've had to do is just advocate for clients. Or, you know, other ways might be showing them that you're not able, that, you know, things that you were doing before while also working, you're not doing anymore. And that you had to cut back, or you had to quit certain activities, or quit certain extracurriculars that you were doing, because work in itself is enough, and that's all you can tolerate. I see another question here. Is there another way to things besides the point system? So apart from using the point system, I guess what you can try also is going about your day, right? And seeing tracking those activities that you did throughout the day, and then doing sort of a check-in at the very end, to see what your fatigue levels were, and maybe almost giving yourself a rating depending on how you're feeling by the end of the day, and then using that to help plan out your next day. Usually, again, it's very dependent on, sorry, I'm going to actually maybe stop sharing my screen. I don't know if you guys can see me or not. Usually with activities, sometimes what I do tell clients is, if you're going to be doing some sort of demanding activity, so a lot of screen time, a lot of processing on the screen, and you're doing an hour of it, what I'll usually recommend is, after that hour, do a half-hour break. So whatever time you spent on that activity, following that activity, take a break that is half that time. So if you did an hour of screen time and it was very demanding, whatever it is that you were doing, maybe it was like an online course or you were doing some research, I would recommend then doing a half-hour proper rest break to really help you recharge. So that's one thing you can do, maybe besides, I guess, the point system. That's in a way trying to pace and plan, right? And the idea is to really try to break up your activities throughout the day, doing maybe a demanding task and then doing a lighter task. Or if you're going to be doing a demanding task, making sure you're implementing a proper rest break right after. And it's almost getting into that habit of implementing those rest breaks. So sometimes if you're using a day planner and you're scheduling your day, it's good to physically put in, during this time, I'm going to take a rest break. Because a lot of the time people just take it whenever they feel like they need to be taking it, versus actively taking those rest breaks throughout the day. because the more, even just the more mini rest breaks you can implement throughout the day, the more opportunities you're giving your brain to recharge. And so that by the end of the day, you're not completely exhausted because you took those opportunities to recharge throughout the day. What else is here? I find the pacing to be difficult to adapt. Do you share that chart from Parkwood or inform where to get a copy? I think I'm caught in a cycle of pushing and not understanding how to do this properly. I have PCS. So I'm happy to share a copy as part of the presentation. And it does explain, it provides a chart, and it also explains at the top how to use it. And a lot of it is very much trial and error. You kind of just have to see what works best day by day, and then adjusting accordingly. Doctors insist on exercising as early as a couple of days post-concussion. Yeah, that is true. I'm so fatigued. It's been 8 years since concussion. If I go even for a short walk, I have no energy left for doing even basic chores, even basic house chores. Ooh, I'm sorry to hear that. 8 years, yes, that's a long time to be continuing with dealing with these symptoms of concussion. At that point, I don't know if there are other things going on. And like I said, there's so many factors that can be involved in your fatigue. And I don't know if they've been left unaddressed, or if there are things that you could be doing to address those other factors that could be affecting your fatigue, and maybe having a closer conversation with your doctor to see what that could be. I mean, it's been 8 years. I'm sure you probably tried it all. But like I said, sometimes it could be your mood that's affecting your fatigue levels. So if that's not being addressed, especially long term, it's gonna get worse. But yeah, that's tough, and I'm really sorry to hear that. I think at the end of the day, if it's I guess sometimes just a matter of figuring out those activities that aren't too demanding, that you can still seek enjoyment from and try to implement throughout your day, as long as you're getting some enjoyment out of it too. But I can see there's so many activities that you were doing before your concussion that right now you have a very low tolerance for, like you said, with the short walk. So I'm sorry to hear that. But in your case, it might just have to, that's just something you have to implement throughout your day, those rest breaks throughout the day, and recharging as often as you can, even if it's just taking those airplane mode breaks, those flight mode breaks, where you're doing a proper recharge, to just block out all the stimuli and hopefully recharge in a way that can get you ready for the next activity. Could you send us the PowerPoint materials to the attendants afterwards? I didn't receive anything from the last session, so asking now before forgetting. Yeah, so I think there are a couple of ways you can access today's presentation. So BIST on their website and on their webinars page, they'll be posting this. Also on their YouTube channel, they'll be posting this. I guess what you're asking is in the actual PowerPoint itself. And what I was told is if you email them requesting those PowerPoint materials, they will then send the handouts to you. Okay, next question here I see. Some of us with brain injury have so much difficulty falling asleep. Many of these suggestions just don't work. How it was explained to me, it was like the engine is always on, just like an idle mode. I just want to turn the engine off so I'm not always fatigued every day. Every day there's no rest breaks. Yeah, so the idea with these suggestions that I made today, or that I provided today, the important thing is to try to implement them on a very consistent basis, and you won't necessarily see the effects um, if you're not applying them consistently, and you won't necessarily see the effects within a week or two. So it can take up to 4 to 6 weeks for those habits to actually kick in, and for you to actually see an effect on your sleep quality and your sleep onset. um, so it takes some time and it takes a lot of work, and we just kind of have to try to push through it. I hate saying that because I'm sure you've heard that enough. Um, but it's really about following that routine and following it consistently, and try to implement as many of those strategies as you can throughout the day, and as you get ready for bed. So I mean, I don't there's so many other things that you can try, some external things that you can try. That your sleeping environment is obviously really important. You want to make sure it's relatively cool, like as in the temperature is low, because that helps with inducing sleep. Um, you know, Scientifically speaking, taking a bath right before bed is a good way to help get ready for sleep, just because that temperature drop from taking a nice warm or hot bath to then getting out of the bath, and that temperature drop can help with inducing sleep. Um, and sometimes I don't know if people have tried using a weighted blanket to help provide that sort of deep pressure stimulation, especially for people with anxiety. That can sometimes be helpful. um, Sometimes people do sometimes try to take melatonin to help. I imagine a lot of you are probably so far out into your concussion and probably heard all of these suggestions. So I might just sound like a broken record to you, but those are some things that some of my more like long-term clients have also tried and have found a difference. But it's not just one thing, right? Sometimes you have to try a whole bunch of different things, but the main thing really is that routine and that consistency with following through on those sleep strategies. I don't see anything else in terms of questions. Um, like I said, these will be available within a week. I was told that they will be posted on their website and on the YouTube channel. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint or of the slides, you can email BIST and request a copy, and they'll be happy to send it to you. I'll be sure to include the Parkwood pacing points chart for you. It's a handout that you can print off and try to use and see if that helps you plan out your day. Let me check the chat. I was only checking Q&A so far. Okay. Someone said lithium battery has only certain number of recharges before declining. Human brain seems to improve with more small recharges. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, so the more you can implement those rest breaks throughout the day, the better it'll be for kind of increasing your sort of energy and also trying to last you longer throughout the day. Seems like a really supportive group here. Lori made a, oh, Lori sent a message, but I think only I got it, but she said something that I think will be helpful for everyone. I struggled a lot around fatigue, and neurologists sent me for a sleep study. It turned out I had severe sleep apnea. Sleep apnea affects your fatigue level during the day because you do not have a restful sleep. It might be something to look at. So, good point, Lori. It's kind of going back to if fatigue really is going on for a while, there might be something else going on. Someone else mentioned fibromyalgia. So that is also, a health condition that can contribute to fatigue, or one of the symptoms of fibromyalgia is that fatigue. Sometimes, people do get diagnosed even with just chronic fatigue syndrome. So it's can get very complicated when there are other health conditions going on, and it's hard to figure out, okay, how much of it is these other factors and how much of it is the concussion. So the more information you have, the better we can try to target those different areas and different factors that are contributing to your fatigue. Let me go back to the Q&A. Okay. Oh, Sheena said something, but only to myself. But I'll read out what she said. She said, and Bob, this is to you because I read your comment too, saying weighted blankets can be very expensive. Sheena made a comment saying that her mom made a weighted blanket for her son by filling freezer Ziploc bags with rice and duct taping them together. It costs about $20 to make. That's very inventive, Sheila, of your mom. Okay. Yeah, so someone asked about THC. I wonder, I don't know if that's maybe in regards to sleep, because sometimes it can help with inducing sleep, or whether it was related to fatigue. But I can't speak too much to that. I don't actually, I'm not too privy to the current evidence that's out there in regards to THC and concussion management, or helping with managing certain symptoms of concussion. I think that's maybe worth talking more so with your doctor about. But I do know there are some people post-concussion, post-burn injury, who use THC or medical marijuana for inducing sleep, at least, or to get a good sleep, or even just to help manage the anxiety, which is another symptom of post-concussion. Let me go back here. Any other questions? Okay, someone asked what to do when the brain won't shut off. That's a good question. And it's a hard one because sometimes you just can't help it and the brain just keeps going. So, I mean, I don't know if people have tried mindfulness to help kind of revert back to, I mean, a big part of mindfulness is bringing your brain or bringing your thoughts back to the present moment. And one of the key ways of doing that is bringing your brain back to your breath and focusing on your breath, and sometimes counting down with your breath is a good technique, or is a good way to try to bring your thoughts away from any sort of worrying thoughts you might be having, and just bringing it back to the present moment. And what you have in that present moment is your breathing and your body and the sensations you're feeling in that moment in your body. So mindfulness is a great technique to use to help when your brain isn't shutting off. There's also, you also want to try to sometimes consciously dedicate a certain time in your day, not too close to bedtime, but maybe earlier in the evening, where you tell yourself, okay, this is the time that I'm going to worry about everything that I want to worry about. And if you give yourself that sort of time and space to do that, it might help get things out of the way so that when it's time for bed, you won't be thinking about those things anymore. Or it'll help at least dilute those thoughts because you already got it out of the way. You dedicated time for that, and you hopefully maybe put it down on paper as well. So it's kind of written out, it's out there, and it's out of your head. And just that visual exercise of putting it down on paper can be helpful. But it's hard. Sometimes you just can't shut your brain off, and that's okay too. It's important to just be aware, right, of when that's happening. I'm just going to charge my laptop here. It's important to be aware of that happening, and even just becoming aware of that is a big thing, to be able to notice that your brain isn't quite shutting off. Because sometimes what happens is you just let your brain continue with festering or thinking about those thoughts, and it gets to a very heightened state of anxiety. So it's good when you're able to realize that your brain isn't shutting off, and then making a decision around what you can do during that time. So it could be doing a quick mindfulness session or using certain breathing techniques. Someone here, Lori, just put a technique in the chat box saying you can count backwards from 100 by sevens. So that just helps, focus on something else. Every time you lose track, you start over. She also said taking the focus off of thinking and ruminating by distracting with a simple task can help. So that's a great suggestion, because a lot of all that cognitive energy is going towards something else versus the thoughts that you were having that were preventing or that weren't helping with shutting off your brain. So that's a great technique. Breathing, again, is also obviously a great technique as well. There's that 4-7-8 breathing, where you take a breath in for 4 seconds and then pause for 7 seconds, and 8 seconds you take to exhale. And just that exercise in itself, as you're counting through that process, again, your mind is focusing more so on that than any thoughts you were having. Jill mentioned chamomile tea is very calming. Someone said they have an app loaded with sleep stories, and they find that those can help when nothing else can to get them to fall asleep. Can that contribute to a lighter sleep? So as long as there's like a time limit to the sleep story, like you have the story and then it just turns off and at that point you've fallen asleep, that's fine. What I was getting at before in terms of letting music continue or letting the radio continue or having the TV still on, that's what contributes to the lighter sleep, when you're actually falling asleep to it. And, I'm sure everybody's experienced this when they fall asleep to the TV and then they wake up because the TV's still on. And so that's what I meant by it contributing to a lighter sleep. But if there's a way that the sleep story that you're listening to on your app just turns off on its own, or if there's a limit to it, then that in itself is fine. So Lori mentioned magnesium can help. Calm is a good one before bed. I'm assuming calm, by calm you mean the app, Lori? A mindfulness app. There are quite a few out there now. There's Calm, there's Headspace. There's one that I really like. It's called, oh, I see, the magnesium supplement is what you meant by Calm. Okay, Calm, yeah. Yeah, there are quite a few mindfulness apps out there. Just only mentioning because I just thought that's what we were talking about here. So there's Calm, there's Headspace, and then there's one that I really like called Simple Habit. Let me just put it here in the chat box so you guys can see. And the reason I like this app actually is because it has mindfulness sessions that are very much catered towards specific circumstances. So actually, maybe I can pull it up on my screen here to show you. And I'll share my screen here. Okay, so the reason I like this app, hopefully you can see this on the right here. So it has these on-the-go sort of sessions. So it's sessions that are specific to different circumstances throughout the day. So there are sessions specifically for sleep, for the morning. If you're taking a walk and you want to do a mindfulness session, there's also sessions for more sort of heightened state of emotion. So whether you're having a really bad day in terms of anxiety or depression, you would go through one of these, SOS or Tough Day. There's also sessions for maybe at work, if you're taking a break or you're finding it really hard to focus. There's a few for that. And then if you're taking a break, there's a specific mindfulness session for that. And it doesn't show you here, but it also lets you decide if you want to take or if you want to do a 5-minute session, 10-minute session, or 20-minute session. So if you haven't tried that app yet, maybe it's worth a try to see how you like it. Okay. So I don't see any more questions here. I'm just gonna say one more time that this was recorded and it will be available on the BIST website and also on their YouTube channel. And if you want to request the slides or request the presentation, you can email them and they'll send it over to you individually. I do want to thank you for joining us today here, and hopefully there are a few things you can take away from today's presentation and apply them going forward, even if it's just some of those sleep hygiene practices tonight, to try a couple out and see. But like I said, a lot of it comes down to consistency and following it for quite some time, because that's the only way we're going to build habits if it's happening over a prolonged period. So I know some of you are really far along in your concussion journey, and I commend you for going along and really trying all these different things. And I hope you were able to learn a few things from each other. There were so many great suggestions in the chat box, and sometimes it's best coming from other people who are going through the same thing as you versus someone like me who's seen it but hasn't experienced it and hasn't felt it. And so I do empathize, and I thank you for spending this time with me. Just to apply the strategies we learned today, make sure you take a proper rest break once you get off, because I'm sure this was very fatiguing. So I do hope you take a proper rest break. Take that airplane mode break, and hopefully you'll find that it helps you recharge, and then you can get ready for bed maybe and follow a nice bedtime routine. And I wish you all a good night's sleep, and all the best with the rest of your recovery. So thank you guys.